Hello. The Divine Code reading for January 28th, pages 467 and 470. We are in the introduction to the unit on the prohibition of forbidden relations. Number 2. Leviticus 22:24 concerns transgender activities. The Peshat of the sentence tells us not to offer to God that which has his testicles crushed, torn, or cut, and further commands, neither shall you do these in your land. So this is a command concerning the offerings, animal offerings being brought in the temple, and the male organs, the testicles, are to be in proper shape. They're not to be cut, they're not to be crushed or anything like that, because that would not be acceptable. And that kind of doing that within the land of Israel would be considered unacceptable. That's concerning animals. But there is more to understand. The Talmud in Tractate Shabbat 110b clarifies the meaning of in your land is referring not to the land of Israel, as one might assume, but rather to one's own body, making the point that one may choose to be castrated, unless disease makes it necessary for prevention of one's life. Okay, making the point that no one may choose. Okay, so the Talmud expands on this idea that it's just not the animals, but in the land also refers to in one's own body. So one does not have the option. A male does not have the option to have himself castrated unless it's medically necessary. It is clear that sexual reassignment surgery or a regime of hormone pills to change physical characteristics of one's sex are prohibited. So this is expanded to understand that sexual reassignment surgery, which is when a male decides he wants to have physical characteristics of a female, and part of that has himself castrated, that would be prohibited because of this, because this is not appropriate. And there's other aspects of, like, a priest who has crushed testicles cannot serve in the temple. So this is not considered appropriate. 3. Leviticus 18:21 literally says, "You shall not give any of your children to pass through the fire for Moloch." According to the oral tradition, this commandment prohibits the insidious form of child sacrifice. Some suggest that Moloch prohibition was inserted into the chapter on sexual immorality because this cult targeted innocent and defenseless children. Now, passing the child through was there was a range of what is considered passing the child through. And on one end, it's the sacrificing of the child. That's the extreme end. But the more moderate end, and probably the more practiced end, was to dedicate the child over to Moloch. And the dedication of a child over to Moloch, the child would still exist, but his life had been dedicated over to this hideous idol. And this was done in order to for the family to receive blessings from this deity, from this idol. Thus, Moloch can also be seen as a symbol for the sexual or psychological abuse of children. Indeed, a salient feature of both pedophilia and the cult of Moloch is the willingness to sacrifice the well-being of one's child for the sake of gratifying one's own desires. Education programs on sexuality found in our public school systems often explain and normalize alternative sexual practices, a process that denigrates not only the individual but society as a whole. So sexual education, when it was first introduced into the public schools, was for the purpose of teaching health. It was to teach healthy behavior between a man and a woman, and to explain this to children. Over time, this has become, as other alternative sexual lifestyles have become advocating for their legitimacy, they're demanding that their practices be included in the sex education. Therefore, children in the public schools are being exposed to information about these alternative activities. And they're being told that these are normal things that people are allowed to be active in. So while the original idea of sex education was a positive idea, it's gone off on a very negative, a very not proper manner, and includes many other things such as homosexuality, and that teaches the children that homosexuality is acceptable and proper. Children are supposed to be a source of blessing for the entire community. But if they're innocent, their outlook, their hopes, and their selfhood are sacrificed by the society in which they live for the sake of greater sexual freedom, then the society in effect sacrifices these children to a type of Moloch. Moreover, by defiling a child, the abuser attacks God's image that resides within that child, the child's soul, and violates the sacred responsibility with which we have been entrusted to honor and guard that image. So the children who are the most vulnerable and are the most innocent are being exposed to these things, and that harms the children. It also harms all of society. It harms the image of God that's most precious within these children. Number 4. In Leviticus 18:24-30, the Torah expressly indicates that sexual immorality of the Canaanites was one of the main reasons God took the Holy Land away from them and transferred it to the Israelites. So within Israel, within the land of Israel, there's a higher standard than existed in the other nations. Now, it's not that the Canaanites were any worse than the other nations. Maybe they were, but they were judged more harshly because they're in the land of Israel. And the main area that they're judged for is in the area of sexual immorality. Do not become contaminated through any of these acts, for through all of the nations that I expelled before you became contaminated. Do not commit any of these abominations. Ta'eviot in Hebrew. When the Torah reminds us here that the Canaanite occupants of the land were being expelled because of their abhorrent sexual practices that are accepted as normative by their society, we need to look further to determine what acts were included. So we need to look at this, and because the judgment is more fine-tuned in the land of Israel, and what may have been ignored by God in other nations, in other lands, was taken very seriously in the land of Israel, and it's enumerated what the Canaanites were involved with, and therefore we need to look at the enumeration of what the Canaanites were involved with, and understand these are things that God takes very seriously. The Torah refers to the same widespread manifestations of sexual excess and moral corruption that brought down entire peoples and cultures throughout history, some which are documented in the Unwin studies spoken about previously. Hence, the paramount importance of sexual moral standards and self-control. As the author, Rabbi Weiner, teaches in the following chapters, the prohibited acts and their offshoots include, but not limited to, incest, bestiality, adultery, male homosexuality, female homosexuality, spilling a male seed, fornication, and transgenderism. It is important to note that the commandments themselves are not open to interpretations that are divorced from the traditional understandings of the text. Unfortunately, certain parties have attempted to develop a new theology, in one in which the halakha, Torah law, is liberated from its moorings in Talmud and set adrift upon the rough seas of human whims and crafty rationalizations. So there's a when people don't like what the traditional understandings, the traditional readings are, they will deconstruct, that is, take apart the traditional understandings and then reconstruct from the pieces. They'll put together something that they are more comfortable with. Reformist camps in many religious denominations have twisted the concept of traditional interpretations of the written Torah into purported license to liberalize, valorize, and even delegitimize the commandments as they see fit, particularly in justifying homosexuality, but also in supporting other sexual confusions. So people are going in and they're looking at the Bible. They're disconnecting it from the traditional understandings. So they delegitimize the way that these commandments are understood, and they say, well, no, that can't be what it says, and they rewrite the interpretations of the Bible in all sorts of, to justify whatever it is they want to justify. In other words, they seize upon the Talmud of the sages that was compiled by devout rabbis who were skilled in deep understanding of the authentic Mosaic Torah tradition as a pretext for reinterpreting the commandments in an unauthorized way. They claim this allows them to innovate compromises with the dictates of our own times. So they'll say that the rabbis of the Talmud were they had an understanding going back to the temple times, going back to Moses. There was a very strong awareness of the oral tradition. They understood during the exile, starting after the destruction of the Second Temple, the major exile. They understood that they're going to need to write down in the Talmud their understandings, because it would be difficult to maintain that oral tradition during the exile. They wrote down. They understood these things in a very deep manner. Now, today, people that don't have the same level of understanding are saying that they can do the same thing. So they're pushing the traditional rabbis aside from the time of the Talmud. They're pushing the Talmudic rabbis aside, and they're rewriting their own understanding of the Talmud. But they don't have the they don't have the back they don't have the oral tradition that these Talmudic rabbis had to be able to just decide upon themselves what they think they're going to do. Now, any committee can get together and decide whatever they want to decide, but they're not going to have the depth of understanding that the Talmudic rabbis have. The reformist approach is antithetical to every authentic spiritual and Talmudic source. This invokes self-deception and playing fast and loose with the Torah's text, tradition, history, and logic. This attempt to fashion a pro-gay and sexual liberationist theology is exactly what the Torah expressly prohibits in Deuteronomy 17:11. According to the teachers that they, the sages, will teach you, and according to the judgment that they will say to you, shall you do. You shall not deviate from the word that they will tell you, right or left. The Torah does, however, explicitly recognize that the sex drive of one is one of the most powerful forces influencing human behavior, and it certainly recognizes how difficult it is for almost everyone to be totally free of illicit thoughts, fantasies, lusts, and arousals, and how much more so in today's commercially hyped culture of sexual indulgence and exploitation. So the Torah understands that these are real concerns that people have. It's not just a list of things that just stay away from it, but they're things that people would not be interested in. The reason the list exists shows that it is a strong desire that people have. When left unchecked, these desires adversely affect both the individual and the society in which she or he lives. The Torah acknowledges that all the sexual acts it prohibits are written within the potential range of human sexual expression. So it's not just coming up with a list. These are actual things that people might be interested in, and the Torah understands this. It further recognizes that if left uncontrolled and unchanneled, as Owen documented, the effect of practicing these prohibited activities is to bring civilized society to the point of disintegration and collapse, thus undermining the very purpose of creation. God therefore ordained and defined a controlled and beneficial outlet for a powerful and potentially destructive force. And that outlet is heterosexual marriage. Therefore, all of this energy, all this interest that people might have, the proper outlet is between a man and a woman in a marriage. That is the way that the universe is designed to operate. That's where that outlet for that interest goes. However, even there, within the sanctity of the marriage relationship, God prescribed specific sexual boundaries, as will be explained in the following chapter. So even within the boundaries of marriage, there's proper behavior. The Noahide Code constitutes God's baseline for a just and moral society. A society that honors this Torah-based morality cannot support legitimized or officially condoned acceptance or more permissive sexual boundaries. However, restrictions beyond these minimums may be instituted. See, for example, Chapter 4 regarding polygamy and the minimum age for marriage. So there are definitions that the Torah clearly defines. And then society can decide to have more restrictions, such as whether or not to allow multiple wives. And most societies say, no, that's not acceptable. Or to have a minimum age for marriage, to say that people need to be a certain age before they're married. And that can also be decided by the society. Thank you.